Welcome back, everyone, for our next and final session. We're shifting from growth opportunities to maybe a quieter but very real source of risk in the M&A space, which is licensing. As distributors expand into new markets, add locations, broaden product lines, or go through M&A, the web of licensing requirements gets more complex and the stakes get higher. And as you heard, a single missed or mishandled license can trigger costly and maybe unforeseen consequences that put this growth and of operations that we've been hearing about all day at risk. So in this session, Avalara's licensing experts will unpack where distributors are most vulnerable, how those blind spots show up in the real world, and what you can do to build a scalable licensing strategy that keeps your business protected as you grow. Marianne Maples and Joe Vituli, thank you for being here. As with our previous sessions, we will have a Q&A function open, so send in all your comments and questions, and we'll get to them at the end of the session. Marianne and Joe, take it away.
Thank you. All right. So just a quick introduction about who we are. My name is Joe Batuli. I'm the senior manager at Avalara for business licenses and property tax. I've been working in the licensing field for about 2 decades now. So basically ever since I graduated law school. I'm an attorney. I'm barred in 3 states, New York, New Jersey, and Arizona. And done a lot of work in the M&A field, which is a very interesting field with dealing with distributors and wholesalers and making sure that everyone's kind of got what they need when they need it.
And hi, I'm Marianne Maples. I'm one of our product solutions engineers here at Avalara. I've been in the property tax and business license world myself for a little over two decades. So I've got Joe beat in that front, but have been working in this industry for a very long time. Compliance, working in the compliance, what I like to call the mosquitoes of compliance, right? They buzz around your head till you get bit. So that's what we're here to talk about today.
So just a quick overview of kind of the agenda we're going to try and put forward here today. So go over some basics of what licensing is, why it's challenging, some of the unique challenges that kind of hit the wholesaler and distributors of the world. I'm going to get right into the mergers and acquisitions and the risks and consequences thereof, as long with some strategies and solutions to best practices to make sure you have the right licenses where you need licenses and keep those licenses. So let's get right into the basics of licensing. So as some of you probably already know, that business license can get thrown around in the vernacular a little bit to mean a bunch of different things. And today we're going to be focusing on what we would call real business licenses. What does that mean? It means we're not going to be focusing on different types of permits. These would be types of building permits, construction permits, zoning permits, student occupancy. We're also not going to be focusing on the tax registrations. These would be state sales tax, payroll taxes, those sorts of different things that pop up. We're going to be focused today on business licenses that could be at the local, state, or federal levels, county level as well, and the regulatory or professional licenses that go along with it. So if you're dealing with certain types of products such as food, certain pharmaceuticals, durable medical equipment, those sorts of things as well, we would also include those into this pot. Okay. So as we get into what those licenses are that we're going to focus on, what causes licensing? Basically, there's a number of things that this can kind of go into to put things together as far as number of licenses and complexity. There things will guard basically sometimes a license, it kind of falls into one or two buckets. So there would be a generate revenue for a city, state, county, revenue generation type stuff. They're essentially backwards business tax, or there's a consumer protection part of it there. So these would be when we're getting certain regulatory products, alcohol, tobacco, pharmaceuticals, those sorts of things where you really don't want anyone being able to do anything they want across the board on these things. So there's a consumer protection element that pops in. And I'm sure that it makes sense that the consumer protection elements, those regulatory licenses, they tend to be a higher complexity and higher rigor than just something that's tax-based, essentially. So, Marianne, you want to
Mhm.
jump in about kind of what different
Yeah,
things would also increase the license
yeah,
counts and license complexity?
absolutely. It's very interesting when you are looking at licensing. If you add one product, one thing as distributors, one new thing I'm distributing, or somebody somewhere once got burned or had a problem or got ill from something, new regulations happen all the time. We are constantly looking at something that, in the 1890s, nobody had to have a driver's license. So think of it that way. If something happened, somebody had an accident, someone needed to be certified to have a driver's license. That still happens today, just in a much broader scale. So when we're looking at that, we're looking at what's true today, but always being forward thinking about what's coming down the pike or what has happened or how have things changed, and they change all the time.
And I think one thing that's really unique for the wholesale distributor side of things is, it's very easy to think, well, I've got a warehouse in Tennessee. I probably need a license for my warehouse in Tennessee. But where you're shipping the goods to where it's going in the supply chain, you may also need additional licenses. So it's not just where you start as the wholesaler, you may need licenses where it ends in the supply chain. And it might be that we talk about certain industries as well, pharmacy is one that pops to mind. Perhaps you have your facility in Tennessee and you ship to essentially a 3PL in Arizona who ships to the retail pharmacy in California. You, because as the guy in Tennessee, may need licenses in Tennessee, Arizona, and California because you have to follow your license throughout the entire supply chain, which I think is
Right.
kind of unique for that type of for the wholesale distributor type of business.
Right. And that custody, if you will, that you have on that property or on that thing that you're shipping, who's in charge? If something happens to it when you are crossing other jurisdictional lines, you got to get to Arizona and then you got to get to California. And is there
Mhm.
something that has to happen, refrigeration or uh, handling or other types of hazmat type things when you're driving from Tennessee to Arizona, right, Joe?
Absolutely. And so these kind of come up with all the different concerns you might have here. Again, we talked about not all licenses are the same, different products, different services, different types of the way you're going about your wholesale distribution business, whether you're taking possession or taking ownership or a combination thereof can affect your licensing. Um, and as Marianne said, it's a moving target. And often what happens is it's because it's a non-revenue generating activity, it gets put in the burner so often. Who is responsible for making sure that your business is fully compliant is always a very tricky subject. And, when it comes to penalties, they range everything from a slap on the wrist fine to shutting down your warehouse.
Yeah.
I had a whole just a wholesaler out in Utah. I think it was Utah. It was Utah, Nevada. I think it was Utah though. And they were working for it was a distribution network for a very big energy drink company. And essentially what happened was they did not get their business license taken care of. And the plant manager showed up on a Monday morning and found that there was a lock on the door that he didn't put there. It was put there by the sheriff. And so, they came. I think we had it. They shut down on Monday. I think we got everything settled by Thursday. So it was about 4 days of non-operation, which doesn't seem like a lot, but 4 days where that plant was not getting the product out, 4 days where there's no distribution, 4 days where there was no revenue going forward. And how long does it take to recover that is things that can go in. And again, 4 days wasn't a lot in that case because we were able to help them pretty quickly, but those things can go on much longer.
There's a soft
And
impact to that too. how
Yeah.
long does that reputation that the sheriff had to come lock your door and you're a visitor in my town if you have a distribution center and the sheriff had to come lock your door because you didn't pay your $100 business license or something, right?
Yep. And then we get into how this affects you in an M&A situation. And licensing affects both the buyer and the seller of an M&A. You know, if you're a seller and you don't have things correctly, set up the way they are, you don't know what you have, that could be a problem. It's going to impact your M&A a lot, what you're going to be able to get for it, what you're going to do due diligence, all those things. And if you're the buyer, you better be doing your due diligence because you might have had everything you needed every single place, but if there's new locations that are coming in, first of all, they're not in the right name, depending on how you're doing your transaction. If you're doing an asset purchase or if you're doing a stock purchase where you're buying the whole company that coming in as a subsidiary, you're putting new things in. This could affect your actual existing licenses as well as the new licenses that you're bringing on. And some of these may be able to be combined, and some of them you might need to uh, get completely new licenses. And it's all going to depend on the nature of that transaction. That's why it's so important to really have a grasp of what you need and
Hmm.
how to get there. Because again, there's so many little things that can pop up that'll change things in a merger and acquisition that's going to affect your licensure. Um, and make sure you have everything essentially where you need on your transaction date, or it's in where it needs to be. Because sometimes you can't do the transfer or update process till after essentially day zero, which is your transfer day. And sometimes you file stuff ahead of time. Sometimes you file stuff after. Sometimes you have to make sure it's filed on the day of. And you
Right.
really have to know that timeline.
Yeah, and that's a really good point too, because not all of this happens in an hour. And so it's you have to know what you have to have ready by day zero
Mhm.
and what your timeline is after that, especially for those non-transferable licenses,
Mhm.
because some of that data, depending on the industry and what you're um, regulating there, again, pharmaceuticals, liquor, alcohol, tobacco, all of those we'll talk about shortly. Um, those do not happen in a day. You don't get a piece of paper, fill it out, and get your license, right?
Yep. There's often notification requirements before and then complete with applications and everything else after. So pops up all the time. And then we get into why it's one of the biggest reasons why licensing can be so challenging is the sheer volume of the types of licenses and locations. And I know it's crazy. Different jurisdictions have different requirements. Somehow in this country, the things that California cares about and does as far as regulations are different than Texas. Who would have thunk it? In a day in the time of the year we live in, it's crazy. And that goes right down to licensing. The one of my favorite examples is we talk about pharmaceutical distributor licenses. Some states regulate it, some states don't. And even the same license in, say, Iowa, it's about a two-page application. In California, I have filed multiple same application, the exact same license, and it's been thousands of pages to do the exact same thing. Absolutely no difference. Same company, same products, same everything, but completely different requirements.
Mhm. And when you're looking at that, you can look at that business change piece, right? That may change everything. We talked about new products, but also new officers. Is there a change in the board? Something like that may require you to start the process over again
Mhm.
mid-cycle. Something like that's very important to know. And again, during the merger and acquisition piece of that, that's all going to change. It's all very, very different. And to Joe's point, if you're in bug tussle somewhere with the one horse town, it may be a little less challenging than a large metropolitan jurisdiction that I won't name.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point because I think a lot of focus in the M&A will go onto the buyer acquiring the seller's licenses and those parts of things. But that transaction, even if it's the same product that you're very similar stuff, you're not doing any new business activities, all of that, the way you structure that transaction can have an effect on your current licenses that the buyer already owns, thinks is fine. As you said, change of officers can do this, change of the corporate structure, maybe they're going to an LLC, change of parent company hierarchies could can trigger necessary licensing updates. It may trigger new license requirements. It may trigger um, basically a new license. I mean, it might be the same license you currently have, but you've got to get a new one because of this deal. And I think that's always something that's kind of overlooked in a lot of ways because we spend a lot of emphasis on how do I get the seller's licenses up to date with the buyer, but the buyer's existing licenses may also change. And it just by the way the transactions worked out. So I think it's always a thing to make sure you're aware of that you don't overlook those sorts of things and get dinged on a license you thought was perfectly fine that wasn't you didn't think was part of that transaction.
Good point.
So I think this is my one of my favorite stats that we've been able to come up with at Avalara, which is what's the time spent doing this? And the answer is over 3 hours is the average amount of time to research, prepare, and finalize a license for you. And that's per license. And that's why it gets into this because it's a little bit different from a lot of things. It's not the same as tax. It's not the same as contracts and your legal team's usually working forward. It's not the same as the real estate aspects or construction aspects that maybe someone else in the company's working on. It really is, it's got a little of all of it, which makes no matter which makes where you put it, a lot of people uncomfortable. Tax is uncomfortable with the legal aspects of licensing. Legal is uncomfortable with the tax aspects, but real estate's uncomfortable with all of it. It all depends on where
Right.
you want to put it. And I think that makes this three hours plus another daunting part of it because it's not something that you can necessarily do quickly across the board. Now, there are some licenses you certainly can, but they're balanced out by the ones where you will spend
hmm
days
hmm
on.
And you can't be sure you got it all.
That's the other
It's
part of it.
it's definitely a uh, where's Waldo kind of thing, right? You're definitely searching. Did you find all of the 100 cats or whatever it was? And how
Mhm.
many candy canes are behind Joe right now? It's, that it works to that when you're looking at the licensing, and all you can do is best you can do.
Absolutely right, because there's so many jurisdictions. Where are your locations? Where are you shipping to? Where are you shipping from? And it's not just I have a Utah license that's going to work across the board for your facilities in Tennessee, Florida, and Texas. You have to have separate licenses for where you're shipping and those sorts of things. So your whole network has to cross license in a lot of places, depending on the products and depending on what you're doing, of course. But you got to look for it every time.
Mhm. Yeah, I think you're scaring people.
Well, I think this gets to where we talk about who's doing it. you
Oh,
know, and we see the different surveys we've done where the titles that are doing license management, there is no plurality here. Taxes got 22%, less than a quarter, but it's the biggest percentage. You see all the different ones here. And essentially what you end up with in more cases than not is the old football problem. If you got two quarterbacks, you got no quarterbacks. And that's where a lot of licensing falls way too often is it's ends up being no one's responsibility because it's everyone's responsibility.
Yeah, that's very true. We see a very interesting group of people working in business licensing. Um, yeah, so now we're going to move over to, well, how does that impact this you? How is a wholesaler or a distributor needing to look at it? And Joe's going to go through this, but the one thing is all the licensing impacts you because you're distributing everything.
Yeah. And it, depending on what you're distributing, is going to be what types of licenses pop up. Depending on what you're distributing, depends on how hard your licensing is going to be. If you are distributing widgets, you are going to have a lot easier time than someone who is a tobacco wholesaler and pharmaceuticals, durable medical equipment, food, and food products. The guy that does up things with vape, the guy that does things with cannabis. Oh my goodness, that's another
Right.
one.
Those are
Um,
new to our industry, too, to the licensing industry. 5 years ago, we were at a conference and people were like, how are we supposed to handle this cannabis stuff? Right?
mhm.
Or the vaping. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when we started our careers, that wasn't a thing.
No, no.
So it's a continued evolution. And even um, we still see an evolution even with things that are more traditional, you know, pharmaceutical wholesalers, oxygen gases, where these things fit, that's still
Mhm.
evolving. And we've been and that's been a licensing aspect for decades.
Yeah.
And we get in here, you see all these different types of licenses that can pop up. You know, very rarely would you have, a wholesaler that's not UPS or somebody that's gonna or
Mhm.
distributor is gonna have all of these things, but and I think most people specialize in some of these things. And that's where that kind of comes into play, where it's just like you got to know your business, where you are, and where you're going. If you're more regional, you got to make sure you have that region down. If you're more nationwide and you got different aspects, you got to make sure that your supply chain is fully licensed for that part of aspect of it. And then, we get into how are you shipping these things? Air, train, truck. When you get into that aspect of it, that's another aspect that you have to consider.
Yeah. Yeah. And for wholesalers and distributors, something that, again, fairly new, wasn't there 5 years ago necessarily, is that home occupation permit that was on there. You might have a
Yep.
lot of people working from home that need to have something. Depends on
Oh,
what's in their garage.
absolutely. And here we got some higher risk product groups. As you've heard us talk about alcohol, tobacco, food, beverage, pharmaceuticals, um, cleaning supplies, cosmetics would fall into here as far as those types of things can pop up as well. Auto parts, accessories, consumer electronics is something that
Yeah,
is getting bigger, and I think it has to do a lot of environmental aspects
yeah,
of it, especially
yeah.
in states like California, where this really comes into play. Tires, a lot of those things come in. Again, it ends up being a lot of consumer protection type of issues, and that's what makes this a more daunting task.
Mhm. Right. You just can't put a lithium battery in the trash.
Yeah. So within there, you have these challenges that kind of come up, making sure you're licensed across these multiple jurisdictions, tracking your renewals and not missing your renewals, making sure your licenses are correct where they're supposed to be, so that if you are in Atlanta, what part of Atlanta? Are you in Cobb County or Gwinnett? Because if you got a Cobb County license, but you need a Gwinnett County license, Gwinnett doesn't care what you do in Cobb County.
Right.
They're going to get you there. Um, Making sure you have the renewals, making sure that you have your license
Yeah.
updated and correct, because they'll figure that out and ding you for it. And we see a lot more enforcement of these things.
And I'm gonna point out this key license challenge when we're talking about the manual tracking of license renewals. I've got a flash for you. Excel is manual tracking of license. works. Everyone's like, I've got
Yes.
Excel. Life is wonderful. Excel is not a database. It's on somebody's C drive. And
Mhm.
they changed the formula in cell E564, which made your whole Excel spreadsheet wrong. All the dates are now wrong.
Oh yeah.
So those are those challenges of like, what do I have to do? So we find people are a lot more reactive than proactive.
Absolutely. When it comes to licensing, Excel is better than a filing cabinet by this much.
Outlook. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and then specifically in the mergers and acquisitions and different structural changes, it's the license is it's not an excuse. Oh, we did this happened, didn't know. No one is going to give you the benefit of the doubt for it. At the end of the day, you needed it and you shipped without the license. That's what they're going to say. And it's very important in mergers and acquisitions that you take a full view of it. You really got to see the whole board.
Mhm.
So let's really dive into some mergers and acquisitions right now and why it's common. I mean, mergers and acquisitions are a big part of the American economy at the end of the day. They are in one aspect or another, they're happening all the time. And they're very big in this industry of wholesalers and distributors because it affects so many different other industries. You know, it's the distributors, they're constantly buying other companies out. They're constantly merging. They're constantly acquiring other types of companies to get it. I mean, it's a very common plan that you have a regional Northeast distributor that wants to go out rather than build their own network. They go buy a Midwest competition or they merge together, and then they go to the Southeast and stuff like that. Then you have at that point you have coverage everything east of the Mississippi and those types of things happen, and you do those things to kind of build that business up. And often what happens there is you have different contracts. It's not usually necessarily a one-to-one relationship within distributors and wholesalers. You're maybe
Yeah.
you have a DME group in the Northeast merging with a pharmaceutical group, pharmaceutical drug group in the Southeast. And looks that now you can all do all these things together and really make your supply chain that much more efficient. But the licensing aspect is a lot different. And you can't do what you did with your New York facility in Georgia just because you're now under the same ownership. You really got to look at everything that pops up in there.
Mhm. Yeah, sometimes it's harder to get something that's already started than starting from scratch because you've got to weed through a lot of that.
Mhm.
So when you're doing that, the licensing piece becomes, do I have what I need to have? And not necessarily believing who you acquired had everything they were supposed to have either.
Absolutely. I've been part of a lot of deals where I came in a little bit late and in the process and and I was told, don't worry, the seller's got everything. They've been shipping for years. Everything's good. And they get the list. I'm like, this isn't good. No, no, no. You have issues. You don't have the licenses you need. Oh, and by the way, you have pending penalties in San Francisco and Chicago that you're going to have to pay. And you just inherited that risk and liability by the way you're doing this deal.
Mhm.
And those sometimes that's a footnote in the ledger. Other times it's tens of thousands of dollars that
Right,
you're acquiring in those liabilities, and you
right.
need to plan for that.
Yep,
Really
exactly.
never take it on face value that you're what you're buying.
And it goes back to the reputational aspect too. You don't want any of this in the newspaper, the proverbial
Hmm.
newspaper, on social media, whatever it might be, because it never goes away.
Yep. And again, and I think one of the things, the timing issues is also a big, big, big key because sometimes you have to notify, there's notifications X number of days before something happens. There's deadlines X number of days for things after a transaction occurs.
Mhm.
Hitting that timeline is Very important.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things we had talked about, we've talked about before too, is one of the challenges is when you have a distribution center that is shared, right? Maybe
Mhm.
somebody else is the distributor and you're selling through social media or through an online service. Well, what is the warehouse or the owner of the warehouse of the distribution center responsible for versus what am I responsible for? And sometimes that line gets a little fuzzy.
Yep. And the number one penalty is a monetary penalty. And sometimes they're small, sometimes they're big. And it all depends on the jurisdictions. I mean, you can have the same error, missing expired license, a failure to do something might be $50 in Kansas City. Same thing in San Francisco might be $100,000 penalty. You may say I'm trying for shock value. I have dealt with six and seven figure penalties in my career. They're rare, but they happen.
Yeah,
And you know, the consequences, states are different, counties are different, and what you're doing is different. So there are different types of penalties for drugs and alcohol than there are for widgets, different from food, different from what's going on.
mhm,
And it all depends. And we got some examples here you can see in the notes about different ones that we've come across. And then especially in the mergers and acquisition world, a regulatory gap can pop up very easily that will affect your business disruption. Now, if you can't distribute in a state because of merger and acquisition, the license not going through or having an issue, it's one thing if that's Wyoming for most distributors, where you sell three things a year. If it's California or Florida, where you make the bulk of your money, it's a whole different ballgame. It talks about your risk compliance there. And alcohol, especially here, you have it there. You look at these timelines, 30 days post-acquisition to avoid the new permits here. Even if they're doing things late, you might have to go before board meetings and get on schedules and stuff. And then, all those things really come into play. Here are a couple of different states, and you kind of just look at all the different states that have these types of penalties and where they are. You have different things with revenue departments, with control boards. What you're doing really matters. What products you're distributing really, really matters. And you can see it's just like you have to just so much disclosures and different things. We talked about the way you do that deal. This is how you can kind of see how it comes into play. Must update new ownership. Well, you're like, well, that's for the existing one. That's for the license I'm buying, right? Oh no, but as part of the deal, Bob
yeah,
Smith of Bob Smith Distributors now owns 6% or 11% or something like that of Acme Distributors, which was your buyer here. That changed ownership for every single license you own.
that's
So,
right.
or we created it as a separate holding company to keep them apart. We created new holding companies in our corporate structure. Hey, that's an ownership change too. It's not the same, even though,
Yeah.
you might still flow up to your eventual owners. You just changed your corporate hierarchy. That's an ownership change.
I'm so scared, Joe. How do you fix this?
Well, that's great. How do you manage them? How do you keep it all straight? So you go into the life cycles of your licenses here, keeping them there, and you have to do this every year to make sure you have everything. And we go into the strategies. Number one strategy, someone's got to be on it. The buck has to stop here somewhere. Um, get it, people invested. Prepare for the acquisitions, right? The due diligence needs to be done. And that's one of the bigger keys, I think, in the M&A
Mhm.
process. What do you have to do? When do you have to do it by? If you can't answer those questions, you're not ready for your acquisition. And what's our solutions? How do we fix this? Get off Excel.
I love Excel. I love Excel, but
It's great at what it does. It's just not
yeah,
good at what it doesn't do.
that's right. Yeah. So we've got, and there are some business license solutions out there. We're going to talk to you, of course, about ours, but this is the thing. Get something that's going to tell you, I need to do something. When, who, what, when, where, why, and how. I will say this about business licensing. 12/31 is the day. Probably 80, 70, 80% joking, that's a just number I pulled out of my hat of the business licenses are due on 12/31. Your lift comes in the middle of some fairly big holidays when people have a tendency to take off you have to be off from work. You have to be in front of those, right? Um, I would say 12/31 is a big day. Let's not wait till then.
Yeah. 12/31, 6/30, 9/30, and 4/15. Those are the four big days in licensing. And you got plenty of other ones spread around where they're calendar year based renewals. It is always like that. That's end of year mergers and acquisitions are always difficult. Do I renew
Yes,
the old license? Do I change the license? Do I, it's what do I got to, how can I do everything at the renewal? There's lots of different things come into play. It makes it very challenging. Anything in essentially fourth quarter for mergers and acquisitions just adds an extra layer of
right.
complexity.
And if I have 12 licenses and they're all due on a different month, I need something to tell me this is when it's due. This is what's happening proactively. Maybe a note in my inbox or something.
Yep. So essentially, this is kind of where when we handle an M&A. So the first thing, what are the license? What's the universe of this transaction? That's got to figure that out first. Then we need to figure out the scope of the deal. So asset purchase, stock purchase, surviving entities, name changes, entities, whatever the case may be. You got to know all of that because that's the only way you're going to figure out what to do. Once you have that, you can set up your timeline. All right, I got to start 60 days out in North Carolina. I got to do California at 45 days, and I got 8 states at 30 days, and I got 22 states at day one, and then within 30 days, I got another 18 states and so forth. Or you're filing when you need to have stuff filed. In order to file an application, you need the information. Got to collect all of that, those aspects of it. Make sure you know geocode where everything is. Identify all the different types of things that are going to go along with it. Insurance certificates. You might need proof of inspections of the warehouses and so forth, whatever the case might be. Get all of that stuff, get it into your timeline, and then it's following up. You might have to schedule with board meetings. You might have to send multiple parts of applications in at multiple times. So
Proper lead
it's,
time.
yep, proper lead time is important. It's not something you can turn to the day after you sign the papers and go, okay, I guess we'll do licenses now. Not going to
Right.
work out the way you want it to. And then within there, we have kind of a software at business at the for business licenses at Avalara. We have managed services that can go through and kind of take this all off your plate, in addition to the professional service that come and, hey, I need everything updated. I need certain pieces of research for the M&A. I need certain due diligence for the M&A. So all of those things are part of our software package for business licenses, or not, I guess our service packages is
Yeah.
a better way to put it.
Yeah. What's that gap analysis? That professional services, I call it the gap analysis, is a great one. Um, for something
Mhm.
like this, it's just confirm that I've got what I have or tell me what I ain't got. Yep.
Exactly. And so now, love to open it up for some M&A Q&A.
M&A
Uh,
Q&A. There you go.
And we do have some in, and I love Marianne, your quote throughout this is like, okay, Joe, you're scaring people. So I think this is a good question to start for best practices. So the question was, we have distribution centers in 6 different states, all different rules. What are the best practices to keep from missing something?
Great. So number one, know exactly where your distribution center is. I think that's key. Are you in Gwinnett County or Cobb County or Forsyth County? So you have what's there. And then knowing what you're shipping where, because, sometimes you're shipping different products that require different licenses. So knowing what you ship is important. And then where you ship each of these different things. Now, you might be that you ship the same things. Great. You're specialized. Perfect. That's one less thing to cover. But where does everything go? And depending on what you're shipping, you may also need to know where it ends up. So if you're selling distributed a wholesaler, you may need to know where it gets to retail, depending on the product. You may need to know what it needs to go to. So you can't just say, oh, sent it off to Acme. Doesn't matter anymore. It's not out of my hands. It's gone. And then the last thing is to know if you are a uh, title distributor or just a possession distributor. This comes into play depending on the different products. So basically the difference is, do I only have possession of the product where it's a flow through and I never own it? Or do I actually take title of this at some point where I own it and it then pass it through? It's like if you're going straight from like a manufacturer, pick it up, I bought it from the manufacturer, I own this now, and then I resell essentially. So either way, you want to kind of know what you're doing essentially. And then once you have that, you can find out what you need.
And then one question kind of specifically is they deal with auto parts, some hazmat. So
Mhm.
are there licensing rules we should be concerned about when shipping across state lines with that product line?
Absolutely. And it's important to know what you're doing there because Autobots can be broad,
Hmm.
but there are different categories within there. You know, it's a difference between spark plugs and rear mirror assemblies than say tires or engine oil or, the lithium batteries in a Tesla. So knowing what that is important because that's going to affect what you're going to be doing as far as what's that's concerned about there. And that's with
Yeah.
even getting into some of our tariffs and everything that kind of pops up. But
Yeah.
it is when you get
And
into auto parts, there is a good amount of
yeah,
regulations depending on the type of parts you do. So like I said, the
right.
rear mirror assembly is not much. You get to like the if you're doing batteries, oil, tires, those sorts of things,
Yep.
engine part, some specific engine parts, it comes a whole different ball game.
Think about what happens if that train derails in the middle of, and who's going to be called in to clean that up? That helps you know what kind of licensing you need, right?
Yep.
And I think time for one more question. One came in. We just merged with a smaller distributor, and I'm not sure whose licenses transfer or what needs to be refiled. Where do we start?
Well, you got to look at what those licenses are essentially and what the nature of the transaction. So that's going to affect what you need to do. Where you start is what's the universe? What are the licenses from that list? You can say, okay, is anything changes? Okay, this is what changed, and then you can kind of come to the answer. So it's like before you get to what needs to be done, there's those kind of first steps that kind of go in. And it's like we run it as a checklist essentially. It's like, okay, here are my licenses. Here's how the transaction went through. Here's the products, and double check I have the right licenses. And then we can go through and say, okay, this is what needs to be changed over. These ones are updates. This one is a new, I have to apply new. These three over here, it's a special application
Yeah.
transfer.
And I think you mentioned too that it's all part of that due diligence process in the
Yeah.
beginning of these M&A discussions. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the best place for it to happen is in the beginning because that's when you have
Yeah.
time to actually
Yep.
get it done without scrambling.
100%.
Well, thank you so much, Marianne and Joe, for unpacking this, sort of complex topic with a lot of different angles to it for our audience. We so appreciate you having the Avalara team being part of today's summit. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having
Thank you.
us. Bye-bye.
Of course. I'll now invite Mike Hockett back for some final thoughts. Hey, Mike.
All right, good to be back. Uh, yeah, I mean, we're at the end of another virtual summit. We've done a number of these, and they're both fun and they're a little bit hectic on the back end for us to put together. But as always, just another collection of great perspectives here that I think we were able to showcase, not only from the distributor's perspective, people who have gone through these deals either on the buy side or sell side, but definitely the advisement side. We had a number of different advisors, uh, you know, uh, presented on here that just they're the ones that have walked distributors through these deals on either side of the equation. So just really great to get that perspective on here. And then certainly wrapping up with Avalara, showing maybe one of the unsexiest things to talk about with
Yeah.
M&A is compliance, but it's absolutely critical. And we just see those examples of distributors or manufacturers or really any business that they're expanding. Maybe it's through acquisition, maybe it's just through a greenfield additional branch they're putting in, and they'll get stuck because of a simple oversight in their compliance that they just didn't do that due diligence, and it can really be costly when they end up running into it. So just glad that we were able to bookend it with that last session here. And as we usually do with these summits, we kind of, as I just elaborated there, we just want to spend a few minutes giving our top takeaways here. We had how many different sessions did we have? Was it
I
five or
think
six?
five. Yeah.
And yeah, again, different perspectives. So I guess I'll pitch it to you, Vesna. Any key takeaways, things that stuck with you, as we move through here? Obviously, you and I were jumping back and forth between the on stage and backstage virtually here. So we weren't able to watch every single session, but for the ones you were engaged with, what were your biggest takeaways here?
Yeah, I want to start with Jay Young from Embark's his AI session because of course we hear about AI no matter what topic we're talking about. So it was, nice to get that perspective for the M&A process and how really AI is currently being used and where it's kind of the most valuable, where it's maybe lacking. And I think so Jay was saying really on the buy side specifically, he mentioned how AI in combination with these databases that distributors are purchasing to find, new targets. Um, AI really has the potential to not only help you create those target lists, but maybe make those lists more relevant than they have ever been before. Um, and he also shared where AI is lacking. So while it's good for the target list, maybe that next step in the M&A process, which is the actual outreach and getting from outreach to the actual meeting process, these agentic AI bots, they're not there yet. There still needs to be that human touch. I think Jay said they're not sophisticated enough to really maximize that conversion from the target list to outreach. So really just, needing that human touch, which is, I think, important, especially I know during one of your sessions, Seth Feldman from Singer Equipment, he said this quote and I wrote it down because I was like, that's the perfect way to conclude everything. It's not about finding the buyer, it's about finding the right buyer. And then he gave that stat like 13,000 potential buyers are out there. Um, so there's so many buyers looking, there still needs to be that human element connecting
Yeah.
them. Yeah.
Yeah, like there's certainly so many things AI can do, and it was great to have that session that explored that. When you think of M&A, AI might not be one of those things that you think is being applied right now, but certainly I thought Jay did a great job of showing how it is being applied. But absolutely, I thought that he brought that up time and time again. As much as AI is being applied in that process, inevitably, at least for the foreseeable future, there's still going to have to be that human element to just because there's so many intangibles that go into these things.
Of course. And I think the culture session, obviously with Mike Marks and Jay, they have great stories. So I'm just praying that we don't release the transcript because anything out of context is not going to look good. I'm like, I swear this was a culture combination at an M&A summit and not just,
Yeah.
gang wars or the stories they were telling.
Mhm.
But I liked what Mike said, that he was saying good employees are very mobile. And so when you're working to acquire companies, you're really, managing these people assets and trying to keep, your A players there. Because really those A players are the first to leave if something kind of goes awry. So just the whole idea, I think, is to over communicate, but over communicate the good, but also the bad, because I think Jay said this. He's like, no news is just seems like bad news. So they'd
Yeah.
rather hear from it. So yeah.
Yeah, that culture element, it was present in almost all of our sessions here. And again, like
Interestingly.
culture is not one of the first things you think about when you're talking about the blocking and tackling of M&A here and what goes into getting a deal done. You tend to think about the financials, you tend to think about the processes that are the ERP systems going to align and all that stuff. But we heard it time and time again, culture just makes or breaks these
Hmm.
deals. Seth Feldman of Singer, yeah, he really hit on that over and over again. We heard it from uh, like Crane Engineering
Hmm.
of Lance on there. He touched on it, and
Yeah.
yeah, it just seems like that is what I saw as the biggest common thread here was you got to get the culture right, or it doesn't matter how good these deals look on paper. It's the people that are it's gonna determine if it's a good or bad deal. So with that, we certainly want to thank our sponsors of this event, Avalara, PMCF, and Raymond James, for doing not only how they're helping distributors, get deals done and getting good deals done, but for just everything else that they're doing to serve this wholesale distribution industry. And of
Yeah.
course, we want to thank each and every one of our attendees that participated today, whether you're watching this live or you're watching it on demand. I know that there's still going to be plenty of you out there that maybe you're going to watch this again or for the first time, and you can do that on demand through January 2nd. Keep an eye out for your email inbox for that on demand link. We just know that M&A it's never simple. It's never easy. Even though we're seeing companies make these deals all the time, we see plenty of serial acquirers out there. They make it look easy, but it's certainly if you ask their executive team, they'll, I think, for the most part, be happy to tell you about all the different ways that the different things that had to be overcome and gotten just right for each deal to happen. So as we wrap up here, I just want to touch on a few other things here. One of them is, I mean, as we've shown throughout, M&A is certainly one of the key topics that we cover here at MDM throughout the year, not just in these
Yeah.
virtual summits. But I did want to share just a couple things quick. Let me get this frame back up. And part of that is our quarterly M&A report. It's one of the many research reports that we put out of MDM Research, and this is tend to what it tends to look like. We do this at the end of after or in the weeks after each quarter ends. We put together this convenient PDF that packages together. It's basically our M&A research, our data, our monthly deal counts, our breakdown of the deals by product category that we showed in the intro of this event. And then perhaps most valuable, we show these financial benchmarks that it shows not only kind of how M&A, the amount of activity out there, but the EBITDA trading multiples across 29 different publicly traded industrial distributors. So it's a great two-page breakdown of all that financial data. And then we have our M&A news roundups by month, and then you'll get our top M&A focused articles. So it's just one of the many reports we put out there that are complimentary for premium subscribers, which includes NAW members, and it's also available in the MDM store to purchase. And then after that, just a couple other shout outs for a couple other events that are coming up. And if you got good insight out of this event today, you're going to get a whole lot more later in 2026. First coming up, I guess later in the year in 2026 is our Shift conference. It's long been one of MDM's biggest events. So we certainly encourage you to attend Shift. That'll be May 12th through the 14th in Denver. And this is where NAW has its executive summit, and Shift is where we go from people going into the processes that are across distribution and really hammering home what's next for the future of distribution. and the strategies needed to get there. So it has just a wealth of content and presentations about growth models, technology, talent, and how considerations like M&A fit into the broader transformation playbook. And then I should have showed this one first, but to start the year off in 2026, we have NAW's Executive Summit, essentially its biggest event of the year. This is in Washington, D.C., January 26th through the 28th. So coming up in less than 2 months here. And this is where industry leaders come together for really a culmination of a year's worth of insights packed into about 2.5 days. With it being America's 250th anniversary in 2026, this kicks it off with the theme of building a lasting legacy. And it's also going to be NAW's 80th year next year. So, real big event all around. And this summit just serves as an occasion to really reflect on, where we've been as a nation, an industry, and of course, a wholesale distribution industry, and charting the course of what's coming next. So please visit naw.org to learn more about the Executive Summit and view its exciting keynote announcement. With that, I'm going to drop the screen share here because Vesna, we're doing our final sign off here. And again, I think we kind of shared all the housekeeping things here, but keep those events in mind as you stay tuned to MDM and NAW. So thanks once again for joining us, whether you tuned in for an hour or the entire 5-hour event here. We appreciate your time and the work that you're doing to build stronger, more resilient distribution businesses. On behalf of Vesna and the entire NAW team, this concludes our 2025 Virtual M&A Summit. Have a great day, and thanks again all around.
Thank you. And just a last minute reminder, you will receive a survey from events@naw.org where you can submit your feedback on the summit, and it will take no more than 5 minutes, and your comments are instrumental to shaping future programs. So thank you so
Great
much
point
all.
there. Yeah. Thanks again.